Lauren, how you doing?
Oh, so good. Thanks for having me, Al.
Hey, well, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me to discuss what I find an exciting topic. And it's something, obviously, it's in the name of PAFOW, the future of work. And I have long been curious around how people analytics is going to influence the future of work and vice versa, how the future of work is going to influence, our discipline. So before I ask you to introduce yourself, if you've joined us, thank you. To enter your comments, questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to the questions that we can during our discussion. But with that, Lauren, introduce yourself and a little bit about why we're talking about the future of work today.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My second time on this show. I am Lauren Wegman. I lead the people analytics team at Twitter. And my background is industrial organizational psychology, where my focus area was the future of work. And this was way back when, before anyone was really talking about it. And so I've been in this space for quite some time now, and am excited to talk a little bit about kind of the theory and what we're seeing in the research, and then some ways which organizations may be able to get ahead to better prepare for the future of work, as the title shows. I did, Al, if it's okay, I did want to just give a shout out to my amazing team, the brains and the brilliance behind all of the work that we do here at Twitter. Got a just absolutely amazing team. There they are, and comprised of data scientists, researchers, IO psychologists, analysts from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds, with the common goal of having a pulse on our workforce, past, present, and future. As well as the added, added and quite difficult task at times, making sense out of varied and disparate data sources to uncover what's really happening, why, and what can we do about it. Amazing team, and we'll talk a little bit about some of their work. I think in this conversation.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, thank you for starting there because I want to make it clear because it's underappreciated, but the world is starting to catch up. Is people analytics and the insight that we generate through this discipline doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't happen because you bought a technology and all of a sudden it appears. So, can you speak a little bit more about the team, how it was built over your tenure there at Twitter?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've built people analytics teams at Twitter's now my third kind of experience with this. Coming to Twitter, I had a team of four, and we have quickly grown over the last 3.5 years to what will be 18 if all of our headcount goes through. So quite a lot of growth, quite a lot of change. And I think of the reasons behind that fast growth and the reasons behind those investments, and it's been because we've been very successful at not just understanding the descriptives and making sense out of the data, but really enabling strategic decisions to be made based on that information. And so we definitely see ourselves as a strategic partner to our COEs within HR, to the business, to leadership. And my team has a wide remit. So we are organized into kind of three sub teams, as we call them. On one side of the house is people data science, and they're responsible for all of our data management, data engineering, piping data in and out of our data warehouse. And they're also responsible for all of our HR related people and recruiting, data visualizations, and reporting. So quite a broad remit within that one sub team. The next one is surveys and research, and that is, I think, the most kind of traditional people analytics sub team there. So understanding what excites our employees, why they like to stay at Twitter, maybe some things that we can do better to make our workforce and our work experience even better than it is, and then also the deep research behind some of the survey initiatives. So I'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's not enough to just kind of conduct a survey and report out on, the high level results. There's so much more information that can be gleaned from any survey. And so that's what our research team does, as well as brings in external data to understand how we compare to the trends going on in the market. And then the last sub team is applied science, and that is really my kind of my background, which is industrial organizational psychology, and that is a powerhouse of a team that is really charged with building measurement and validation into everything that we do as a people team within Twitter. So they work directly with our centers of excellence, our COEs, ensuring that every time we roll out a program or an initiative, that we have a measurement strategy, that we're using solid methods, and we know the ROI of asking employees or managers for data and for information.
I so celebrate what you shared, and I do not want to get distracted because I want to just jump into the future of work discussion, which is the theme. But I want to come back to the team at the end if we have time, just because the systematic way you just described the capability, I think, is not only very thoughtful, it's immensely appropriate given the range of data that we're dealing with today and the diverse needs that we're serving within a diverse community within any organization. So yeah, thank you for sharing that and staging it. So I know you have these points. You want to take us through how you're thinking about the future of work and your processes?
Yeah. So I would like to, if it's okay, I'll take just a step back and talk about kind of what the future of work is in a nutshell, and kind of the why behind why we're seeing changes in work and in workers in the workplace. And
Let's do that.
as a good psychologist that I am, I like to focus on the theory first, so we understand what's going on behind the hood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in thinking about changes that impact work and workers, there are actually different levels with different associated amounts of organizational control. So, at the highest level, things like macro changes, right? Environmental, societal changes that organizations have little to no control over and little to no warning for, right? COVID, I think, is a really good example. The rise in global competition, a slower trajectory, but I would also include that within this space as something that organizations needed to react to and needed to figure out a way, right, to get ahead of. And then comes the micro level. So if the macro level is kind of the top, the micro, I would say, is kind of the middle. And this is where companies, leaders, and organizations come into play. This is the space that we have control over. We can describe and design the physical work environment. We can organize the work. We can organize it in terms of, is it a hierarchy? Is it anonymous teams? Or is there cross-functional implications? Is it very independent work? And then we can also design the work itself, right? So thinking about what makes up a task or what makes up a project. And so we call that characteristics, right? Job characteristics, work characteristics. So I think a good example of one is, how many different skills are needed to successfully complete a task or a project. And as employees kind of respond to that, the macro changes and the micro changes across time, what we start to see is the shifts in employee behavior. So, for instance, thinking about employees deciding to work from home, the rise in dual income families, the trend in longer hours worked, the trend in job hopping, all of these have kind of roots right in these macro and micro trends in the broader environment, in the broader organization. And I won't take up too much time here because I know that we talked at length about this last time. But from a research standpoint, the TLDR is that work is more complex, and that this places significant demands on workers, with likely negative implications for things like mental health, physical health, and work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to kind of take that step back because it's bigger than just one fix. It's bigger than just, hey, let's put this policy in place and everything will be good. And what the 10 points that that Al, you flashed up there earlier, those are not designed to be end all be all by any means, but they are, from at least a people analytics perspective, what I would recommend to invest in as in order to really help succeed in kind of the next wave of future of work.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm smiling here because I love what you're saying so much. I can't even stand it because it's something that I think is underappreciated. And let me call out just two things. Number one, the idea not only for systematic thinking, but systematic action. And so, yes, we can, there's a variety of variables that are impacting the employee experience. For example, you mentioned, well-being. So there's not just one policy or one, fix. And similarly, there's not just one analysis that's going to shed light on it.
Right,
We have to
right.
continually investigate and stay in that compassionate curiosity. The other thing that I want to, that I was smiling about is getting down to the work level, because there's been particularly, and I think you and I talked about this before in one form. Like I grew up in what I call the suck it up generation. There's just a bunch of work to get done, throw it at you. That's the
Just
way it
have
is.
to do
You
it.
just got to do it. And fast forward, behind me is Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer's book, Dying for a Paycheck. There's Rob Cross's book, Beyond Collaboration Overload. People are suffering as a result because we've, frankly, from a leadership perspective, have been lazy about crafting and designing work. And there's people have suffered. But now, in my view, and I'd be interested in your take on this, it's irresponsible to not investigate what's happening and what levers can be pulled to improve the employee experience, improve productivity, innovation, all those good things. So, with that as a staging, can you comment on specifically, is there a broad understanding of this beyond your team? I imagine, as the leader of the team, your team gets it, but in terms of, yes, we push out insight on an ongoing, recurring basis. Who's your audience for that? Do they understand the need for systematic change as well?
Oh, I would say yes. I'm very lucky to work with just amazing leaders and thought partners here at Twitter. I'm thankful for their support and their input every single day. And I think that that's one of the reasons why my team has grown so quickly too, as we were talking about in the beginning, is the value that the data can bring. And it's not just the data. There's a quote, I might have shared this last time, but I just absolutely love it, by Wayne Cassio, around organizations are drowning in data but starving for information. And I think that that's really the purpose of my team, is to take all that data from this system, from that system, from over here, external, internal, and really pull it together to share not just the story that the data are telling, but how we can change the ending, right? And so I think that that takes past analysis, current analysis. I think that that takes projections into the future and scenario planning. But yeah, I am really fortunate in my support network here at Twitter. Our main consumers, I should say, of our data really, honestly, is the whole company. So we have some projects, we have some dashboards that go out to the entire company. We have some dashboards that are just available for certain levels of the organization. And then in terms of kind of deep analysis, deep research recommendations, we're a very transparent company. And we share a lot of information with our tweets, as we call them, and our survey results, our analyses, things that we've asked the entire workforce to take and to tell us what they're thinking. I feel it's an obligation to tell them, how the scores ended up, right? So like,
Mm.
if I know for a fact that I would rate, I don't know, autonomy, right, as really high, and then the scores come back and there's kind of a mid score. I think that's important for folks to really understand and to think about their own jobs, right? And back to the characteristics of the jobs themselves, a really good way to get at some of those is from surveys asking questions that are a little bit different than
Mm.
your typical engagement or experience survey.
I love it, and just the idea that we are being very intentional with our asks and just not pressing reset on old engagement models and getting down to the nature of the work and how they feel about it, and elevating that creativity not only at the systematic level, what we're talking about, but also at the individual level, so they can help design their own work, right? So, with that, I know we've teased this a couple times already. So I'll bring this, back up. Do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, of course, of course. So again, this is not the end all be all. This is more or less like top of mind of what I'm hearing, seeing, and thinking, and advising companies and managers and leaders on how to invest for the future. For the future of work, I guess I should say. And this is all from a people analytics perspective. So not as broad sweeping as things like, invest in flexible schedules and things of that nature. These are more around that systematic approach, and how to continuously measure and pivot and adopt to the uncertainty or to the changes within the environment. And so I'll take a kind of step by step, and Al, feel free, ask me any questions. Love your thoughts on these as well. Being, an expert within this space yourself, would love your opinion too. But at the top, I have data refresh. Probably very boring, to some of you on this call, but it's so important, and it's important for a few different ways. I think of clean data as the foundation of HR. So um, with HR moving and continuing to move into increased need for data driven decisions, investigating or piloting AI, we are going to need clean data, and we're going to need it to be readily available. And so that kind of brings me to another point around like the data refresh is, are there processes that you or your HR function are running that could be combined, right? So think about if we are reaching out to managers to ask them to rate their directs performance, can we also ask them, hey, is what when do you think this employee will be promotion ready? And we can take that information and start planning, right? So the more information we can get in kind of a more embedded framework, I think is really helpful in terms of not having those separate standalone events.
Mm.
And then my last point on here, something Al you were saying earlier, within the survey space in particular, but also within any data collection measurement, we have to have the flexibility to revise questions and revise answer choices. And I know that goes against psychometric best practices, and we need to keep everything the same for trending purposes. But when constructs are changing or when new constructs are emerging, we have to be able to measure them in real time, and we have to be able to report on them. Some of the new constructs that came out of kind of the COVID timeframe, right, was a focus on well-being and resilience and energy, but also with so much going on within the DE&I space, thinking about different categories to understand the demographics, or are they more continuous than dichotomous as they've been in the past? So I think there's a lot of change that will happen within the measurement and metric space, and I definitely think that it is already starting, and should just be built into kind of a regular practice of auditing and evaluating what's working and what's not.
Yeah, if I might jump in there right there. Again, I've grown to like you, respect you, appreciate you. But
Thanks, Al.
there's no buts. And uh, one of the things that you and I are aligned on that I want to call out, which I would encourage every people analytics leader, without exception, to explore, is the need for appropriate data. So part of our magic, if you will, our expertise is built in, hey, you want this insight. So if you want that insight, then we're going to have to oftentimes create appropriate data, because that data might not exist. I mean, I was in role, you were in role where we were customers of existing data sets and we couldn't do
Hmm.
anything about them. And then we tried to make magic out of them, and that doesn't work. We often have to go back, revisit, and that's where our creativity as analysts come in. So I would encourage everyone to, guys, get unencumbered for a bit, explore what's possible. And that's not only immensely valuable, it's fun. It's like you get closer to the heart of,
Really
what the
is.
levers are. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to emphasize that point because I think it's underappreciated. So thank you.
Oh, it's so true. No, thank you. Great, a great emphasis, and yeah, totally plus one.
So we got this back up. Sorry, I keep teasing people with it, so I'm going to leave it up for a bit.
All right. So number two, I touched on this a little bit earlier too, connecting your survey initiatives. By now, many organizations have solid employee listening or employee survey foundations. This is not a new concept, right? Guys' job satisfaction surveys, the 80s and 90s, then moving into engagement in the 2000s, and now this concept of employee experience and life cycle surveys. And I think all of that is good and should continue. But what I would recommend changing is actually the analysis of the survey data. So most organizations that I talk to like to take a survey as its own program and analyze that survey. And then another survey comes out, we analyze that one. And then another one comes out and we analyze that one. And we show, some trends over time and some, ups and downs of different items. But what we're missing is really connecting the dots among those surveys to tell the story of the different milestones and the impacts on the employee. So for instance, how does high levels of company pride at day one impact company commitment at 1 year? And those are the types of questions that you can't ask in one survey. Those are the types of questions that you need that solid survey foundation in order to understand. And these are the questions that are really going to be differentiators within the competitive landscape, in my opinion.
When you share that, is that part of your quote unquote employee listening strategy, employee experience strategy? What's the naming convention that you apply to that?
Yeah, so on my team, we like it simple. So we stick with surveys and research.
Okay. Got it. And the reason I asked too, do you have an employee experience function there?
So that's a little bit of a long story. We do. We do. I used to report directly to our head of employee experience, and then she became our CHRO.
Okay.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman, Delana Brand, just amazing leader.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. Because sometimes we paint ourselves in corner with our naming conventions and understanding, what is what and what's not. So
That's true.
that's
Yeah.
the impetus that's the reason for the question. But yeah, continue. This is great.
Okay. So then number three, I'm recommending a focus on skills. This to me is the common language connecting each job, each JD, each resume, each competitor, right? So that we can try to compare as apples to apples as possible. And this allows for, from an employee perspective, right, better career pathing, promoting internal transfers. So for example, if I want to move into data science, I need to learn X skill in order to fill the gap to be successful within that space. From a competitive standpoint, you can look at your company's profile of skills and then your competitor's profile of skills and start to ask questions like, why is this competitor seeking so many why skills? And do I already have the why skills? Are they potentially looking to me as a source for gaining these skills, or do I not have these and they potentially could have some strategy or some insight that we've missed? So I think that it's really important from multiple angles. And the last one I'll just hit on really quick is sourcing and hiring, right? So where are we most likely to find this Z skill, right? Where is it the most prevalent? And how quickly do we think we can hire, onboard, and train if this is a skill that you grow into? And this is I think that this is a newer opportunity looking at external data sources, and the vendors within this space are becoming more advanced. And so I do think that this will become easier to do in terms of skills mapping and skills library in the near future.
All right, well, let's talk about that. And if you're joined us, we are going to go past the bottom of the hour for a little bit, just given the nature of the discussion. So I want to set expectations accordingly. This topic is not only really important, I think we need to understand that we as people analytics professionals not only need to be good analysts, but we need to be good shoppers, to your point, of data and insight that is outside of our organization. And we can
Mhm.
go through the list of vendors, but my pointed question to you is, a lot of times this call it talent market data or labor market data resides within talent acquisition or workforce planning, but it has applications and location strategy and on down the line. It's are you is it housed or owned, so to speak, in another organization, or are you quote unquote the owner of the acquisition of those types of technologies?
Yeah. Um, so we are responsible for part of it, and we are responsible for bringing on tools and vendors that we need in order to do our job. But we have a labor economist on the research team who is really responsible for that, like external looking and helping us with the competitive analysis. And she does the heavy lifting in terms of the data, the analysis, she does the predictive modeling, the projections, and then we share that information with our location strategy team, with our sourcing team, and so it becomes a little bit of a we've kind of got different. We broke it up, I guess, into different purposes, so that it's not a centralized. It's not a centralized approach. It does require a ton of collaboration and communication, and honestly, that's one of the things I really like about Twitter is we like to collaborate. We like to learn what other teams are doing. We like to try our hand in different things, and I think that leads to experimentation and a little bit of a lot of learning.
Yeah.
There's never a collaboration event or some type of work stream where we're bringing all these cross-functional partners together that you don't learn something or look at something from a different perspective. So we're pretty happy.
Well, I mean, that's fantastic. And thank you for sharing, because I would hope, and this is me projecting my bias, so I'll own this, that people analytics teams, quote unquote, own the external data and the internal data, that there's not competing narratives going upwards and confusing.
Oh
There
yes,
needs to be
yes.
alignment there. So, thank you for sharing. So, back to our story.
Yeah. Well, actually, you hit on number four, right? Looking externally. So, how are we expecting the external market to influence our business and our talent? And it's more than benchmarking, as we were talking about before. And it's more than just an external focus, which I think of people analytics as in the kind of the earlier years of people analytics was very much an internal focus on the internal data, but we need to have that much insight on the external data, external trends as well. And Al, as you were saying, like the initiatives that can be can use this type of information are things like workforce planning, location strategy, headcount planning, retention, competitive analysis. I mean, you name it. It's super valuable insight and strategic information. And sometimes just being ahead of your peers, even by a really small amount, can go a long way in terms of outcomes that we care about, like employee well-being, retention, employer voice, etc. So even if it doesn't feel like a step change or a large realization, a large insight, every small step I think makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned workforce planning. Does that reside within your group, or is that a separate group?
So that is our labor economist provides the like projections for the workforce planning team, but it's also spread out across not just across HR. So we have folks who are in finance, right, who are driving like headcount planning, and so it's really becomes an exercise in sharing the insights and the analysis from my team with the business or the HR COE who need that as input in order to do do their job. And so to your point earlier, Al, about kind of not having different analyses, right, or different projections going to the same business owner, that we control for that, but we still have the ability to have that collaboration because the analysis piece and the data come from my team, and then the insights and recommendations in terms of where they need to increase heads or increase spend or look at this location, that is then executed, right, and cited by the COE or the business.
Okay. And I would like to talk about that like in a podcast with you, or we're gonna have to come back to that because and again, just to set this up for those who are listening and will listen to it afterwards, is that workforce planning increasingly is not only about headcount planning and making sure we're bringing in the right people externally. It's factoring in internal mobility, disruptions from robotic automation, artificial intelligence, and so forth. So, the fact that you have a cohesive set of processes, and again, I imagine we're all learning, so I don't want to put you forward like everything's perfect. So we're all learning and creating as we go. But at the same time, when we talk about the future of work, this is straight towards that. It sounds like, is that a fair way to bridge the gap between workforce planning and the future of work, so you're more creative in crafting the future of work as opposed to it being imposed upon you?
Yeah. I think that's the really big kind of mind shift, right? So as we're thinking about the theory of kind of these changes, right, and with the unprecedented changes that are facing us today, we would expect then that employee behavior and employee attitudes are changing at an exponential rate, as well. And I think that understanding what those macro and those micro level changes are gives us insight into not just how we can respond, because I actually think that historically organizations have focused on changes in the macro environment as obstacles to overcome. And I think the mind shift change is that we have to focus on these changes as an opportunity and as something that will give us a competitive advantage and will give us a foot up. And so that's what we're looking for when we go out. We look for our the trends in the macro environment, the trends within the company. What can we do from a job design? What can we do from a workforce design, a workforce planning that can not just help or buffer, but will actually help us thrive.
Yeah. Gosh. I'm just going to keep complimenting you. I just got to get over it. So take us, I think we're at we're at 5. Yeah.
I think we're at 5. But Al, actually, we were kind of on 7 in terms of understanding employee movement. That was a little bit about what you were talking about. So why don't I take that real quick, since it's pretty related, right? You were talking about how we need to understand the trends in the workforce. We need to understand the lateral moves, right? And many organizations who invested within the people analytics space, they start kind of their modeling baby steps, right, with attrition, right? Core outcome for the company, easily tied to dollars. And so then once that attrition model is checked, right, you keep it updated, you validate it, et cetera. But we've got to look for other things that we can predict that are meaningful to the organization and to employees. And so bringing in employee movement, bringing in things like promotions, bringing in things like lateral moves. I think understanding career paths and common or organic trajectories really can aid in career development. And sometimes it's the small things about a company that really keep your higher performers, and not the kind of broader sweeps of of the company or of the company culture. So it can just be, I have a very specific career path, and I know that others have gotten there through this, and I know what skills I have to work on, going back to the skills. And so this is kind of where I was talking a little bit earlier about the input into programs. So say that you have a model predicting promotions. So along with asking, managers and leaders like who we should consider for promotions this round, the predictive modeling could actually supply a list of potential viable candidates for promotion consideration, which I think is a huge step in terms of equity as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I'm going to stop interrupting you because, but yes, yes, and yes. That's all I'll say to that.
Well, I can keep going. Let me know if if I get too long winded. Okay, Al.
No, you're good. We're totally fine. So
We're
you
good.
keep going.
Okay. All right. So hopping back to qualitative data, um, many organizations that I've talked to are really sitting on a treasure trove of rich and detailed and highly useful information. However, it's in open-ended and free-form text. So tools can help with making sense of this data if you can't invest within, a data scientist or NLP. But this is where you would get to ask questions like, are our job descriptions gender neutral? Is the job description and the candidate that we offered the job similar in terms of those skill sets? You can even parse out historic JDs, historic resumes, and kind of jumpstart that skill collection library that we were talking about too. So a ton of opportunities in there, not just to get glean color right for your survey responses, but to really answer some of these questions that you can't answer with quantitative methods alone.
Right. Nah, I certainly celebrate that. It goes back to, appropriate data, and we won't know unless we investigate it. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So number 6 is around validating HR processes. So another one that doesn't sound as exciting, but you think about historically HR's bread and butter, and it's designing and implementing and maintaining HR programs and processes. And, thinking about where we are today and thinking about where we could be tomorrow, that's not enough. We have to, I would add, we regularly have to validate to ensure whatever our initiative is measuring what it's supposed to measure in a valid and a reliable way and is not subject to bias. And there's a whole field that can help with this, and it's the IO psychologist. This field has been doing this type of work since the 1920s. So quite a wealth of information and insights across that time period.
Yeah, it's amazing because IO psychologists, and I know PsyOp has been, I would say, struggling with this because that's not uh, Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychologists. Uh, you have the applied and you have the academics, and there's complements there. There's sometimes arguments, as you well know,
That makes it
but
interesting, right?
it makes it interesting. But the application of the 100 years of that work is now scalable. It's now implementable. It's not just in a binder somewhere or in a book somewhere. We can actually make good use of it. So that's certainly worth highlighting. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about number 7, so I'll hop into number 8 here, around understanding informal networks. So while I would still say it's relatively difficult to get the data to do this, again, vendors can be helpful and have come a long way in this space. But at the core of this is if we spend time analyzing just this relationship to this variable and this variable's relationship with this variable, we're missing, what I would say is like ripple effects, right? Ripple effects of things that impact more than just one node or one group. So things like organizational decisions, things like communication and communication gaps, and what about managers and how or whom they're communicating to. And with being in a virtual environment, this makes the capturing of this data even easier. But take this example. I like this a lot because I think this is relatively new in thinking about this. But um, say you have a low performer, and they're low performer. They keep getting poor performance scores. maybe they're actually not in the loop of the communication channel. Maybe they are somehow left out, and so they're not getting the information that they need in order to successfully perform. And so you would handle a true low performer who is getting the information that they need to perform, and a quote unquote low performer who isn't connected into that network. You would treat those two things very differently, right? The solve would be different. So I think that that's how we have to start to think about the network analysis, is in terms of, I think the classic example, right, is, hey, I'm a manager and here are my employees, right? And if I leave, what's the implications for them? And beyond that, into how are we classifying and how are we thinking about people, and what are the different levers that we can use in order to influence the behaviors and make it a healthier workplace, a better environment, a better performance, etc.
Thank you for highlighting that, because I could not only agree more, but in terms of bang for a buck, so to speak, it's such a huge opportunity that has been under served, in my view. Let me just pause there. Would you agree with that?
The network analysis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And taking action on the network analysis.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
facilitating onboarding, facilitating, promotion effectiveness, getting up to speed quicker, building that relationship equity that, in a systematic, intentional way, as opposed to just hoping it works out. So,
Right.
yeah, and I celebrate that it's in your domain of study, that you are looking at it vis-a-vis all these other variables and insights, because it affects inclusion, it affects performance, it affects all these factors. So
It affects everything, and it's only really taken off in the last 10-15 years or so. And so there's a ton that we don't know yet about that method, and there's a ton of research questions that we can continue to ask.
I'm gonna give shout out to Rob Cross right now. Yeah. So
Oh yeah, I love that one. That's a
yeah,
great book.
and Michael Arena, Adaptive Space, and what they're doing in Connected Commons, and it's a amazing field, because after all, we're relational beings, right? We draw
Exactly.
from one another's energy, like you and I are doing right now. so, so yeah, and we're almost through this list.
We
So
are. We're
what do
making
you got?
progress.
We are.
So number 9, and Al, as you were talking about equity, right, and equality, I just have assess equity, and I think that I think it's a good step in the right direction for annual pay equity assessments, but that's really only table stakes in the near future, and we've got to build out a more cohesive and more detailed kind of equity analysis plan, looking at things like pay at hire, pay with promotion, promotion frequency, velocity of promotion, performance equity, and the list can continue and continue. But that's really the only way that we're going to understand those potential differences in pay that your annual equity analysis could uncover. And I think of that as pay is kind of the end all be all. It's the most distal outcome. And so if we understand the inputs into pay a bit better and look for equity there, I think that we will have a kind of more well-rounded approach to assessing equity.
Now, do you use a specialized tool to facilitate that, or is that something that you and your team do just based on the analytical tool that you have access to already?
Yeah. So, for the information that we publish externally, we do have an external labor economist run the analyses to keep it separate, which I would also say is best practice and would recommend it to anyone who's considering that practice. And then internally, yeah, we use a variety of different statistical tools. We've got some folks who will analyze in Python, some in R, some in SPSS. It's in-house. You get the syntax, you get the code, and a lot of another best practice I would say is, if you're kind of taking on this or any type of analysis, do write the code, do save the syntax, because then if you want to run this quarterly, if you want to run this annually, you'll be able to do that a lot quicker.
Yeah, love it. And that brings us to, I believe, number 10. And
Number 10.
it seems like it's self-serving.
I'm a little biased here, Al. I'm going to admit it. But, if you think about it, if you've got all these other, 1 through 9, so you've got clean and up-to-date data, you're looking at the big picture in terms of employee attitudes, you're understanding why employees are moving, why they join, why they leave, and the impact of, the changes on the external labor market and on your workforce. You are really at a place where you have a great amount of data to better understand your workforce than ever before. And so I'll go back to my, my Wayne Cassio quote around organizations drowning in data but starving for information. You've got all this additional now data. You've got all these additional insights. How do you pull it together? How do you prioritize it? How do you know where you should act first? And that's where I think people analytics really comes into play, is understanding how organizations can make sense out of all of that, and not just knowing where you stand today, but predicting where we'll be tomorrow.
Well, with that, we'll start to wrap up. And I want to just highlight, because I mentioned we'll come back to teams, because invest in people analytics, yes, it means investing in technologies. It means investing in people. Sometimes it means investing in data that's outside the organization. So again, it doesn't come for free. Anything that you want to add on top of that, because many have just implemented a core HR system or an ATS or something. Where are my insights? And the idea that, hey, there's much more that needs to be done. I get frustrated. It's like, what's the business case for this? What's the business? What are the risks of not doing this? And
The risk of not doing this. I think that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And for those, just kicking off an initiative, just, getting your feet wet within the space, just having implemented a new HRIS, a new ATS, it takes time. You can't just hit, go and then have insights available that day, that week. It takes a lot of time. And the more historic data that you have internally as well as externally, will help you be able to understand and predict trends in the future with greater accuracy than if you only had even just 1 year of data. So the more, the longer, all of that will lead to more accurate and more appropriate insights and recommendations. And so it really does take time, which is why it's important to invest now, at least in my opinion, to set up your organization for those potential, unprecedented changes that are, very readily available within the work environment.
Well, as we do wrap, I want to ask this in closing, because you have grown the team. I imagine your team is going to continue to grow and shift and move, over the years to come. And you also highlighted the fact that there's a diverse array of ways to enter the profession, and add value. So if you're going to coach people, students, or early career professionals who aspire to be people analytics leaders someday, what would you say to them?
Yeah. So yeah, there's not one method. There's not one career path. And when I'm looking to hire folks on my team, I purposefully interview and consider a variety of different backgrounds that are outside of IO psychology that we talked about. On my team, we've got traditional data science, traditional engineering, but we also have researchers and analysts who have come up through other avenues. We've had some folks who branched into the team who were in recruiting or in sourcing, in executive sourcing, and kind of came in kind of through that route. And it always just brings a different perspective, and it brings different research questions with which to look at and ask. And so I would say if you're starting out, you're already at a better spot than when I was back at school. So we didn't have courses on, people analytics or HR analytics or BI. And so, do invest in it while you're in school, if you do have that opportunity. And then there's a ton of free courses if you want to do a data boot camp, if you want to learn coding. But yeah, I think that it really, to me, it really comes down to where's your passion. If your passion is people analytics and you show entry level skills, I can take that and I can train you. And that's really, but you need that passion, right, in order
Yeah.
to stick with it.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
thank you
easy.
for that. Yeah, I agree. If you have the basic, quantitative and qualitative, that insatiable curiosity and willingness to learn and take appropriate action on that learning, I think, to rephrase what you shared, I mean, I couldn't agree more, because there's a lot of energy and creativity required to do our work. So, Lauren, thank you so much. How can people learn more about you and what you're up to there, other than
Yeah.
listen to the
Well, yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter at people PhD.
All right. Well, hey, I thank you. I also am extraordinarily excited to be with you in person in 2 weeks' time there in Atlanta. So we're going to do a Val Connect down there. So we'll tweet out and do what we do. But yeah, super appreciate you sharing. If you asked a question and we weren't able to get to it, I will follow up. I'll talk to Lauren and we'll follow up directly. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for participating. And again, Lauren, thank you for being your awesome self and sharing today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
You be well. All right. Talk to you.